Hello and welcome to Insiders, a podcast all about the world of television with me, Peter Fincham.
And me, Jimmy Mulville.
This is the podcast for people who love TV and want to know a bit more about what goes on behind the scenes.
Yes.
So Jimmy, it's Wednesday morning, which is when we record.
Yes.
And
good morning, by the way.
Good morning.
Right.
And we still can't confirm that the next Director General of the BBC is Matt Brittin.
No, they're drawing it out, aren't they?
They are drawing it out.
When did it start? When did the murmuring start?
I think it's absolutely symptomatic of the modern news management age that the name gets out there in a sort of...
They float it.
Yeah, he floated. He's the kind of...
Didn't they do this, say, if there's anything lurking in the cupboard?
Well, I think it's a bit like the vicar in church who says, is there anybody who wants to say why he shouldn't be director of the BBC?
Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Exactly, in case somebody's kind of rushing out of the woodwork and said, no, actually he murdered his mother or something.
Or the love child somewhere, or he didn't pay his TV license. Is there something lurking in...
Well, nothing has come out. He gets very good press. But still, then we got, I think I read at the weekend that it was confirmed that he was going to be.
So they've made an announcement, they're going to make an announcement.
Basically. And yet still it has not been announced. And I kind of wonder why.
You can get a pope a bit quicker than this, couldn't you?
Yes, you can, yeah. But so I don't think we can quite assume he's going to be the Director General. He's got a very interesting background. He went to Cambridge.
Did he?
As you and I did.
Yes.
He went to a college called Robinson College. You remember Robinson College?
No, it wasn't. It didn't exist when you and I...
It didn't exist.
When you and I were there...
It was a building site.
They were all called after Jesus.
Robinson
my college was Jesus.
Was named, did you know this, after a man who made his fortune in TV.
Was he called Robinson?
Yes, yes, but he made his fortune in TV rentals. So that's kind of interesting. That this
Is it?
Alumni,
I nearly fell asleep when you
alumni of
described that.
Robinson College should end up as a Director General of the BBC, because that's the origin
There's a
of
whole new
Robinson
episode.
College.
What will they call new colleges at Cambridge? Will they,
Yeah, exactly.
Pornhub.
Well, and anybody's got enough money to bestow on it. So then he's also known for being a rower, which when we were there, I mean, it was different sort of people who went rowing, because that meant I'd go very early in the morning,
privately educated.
very hard work,
Yes.
very athletic.
They have steak and eggs for their breakfast.
We were people who got up at lunchtime, went down to
That was an early rising
review.
For me. Yeah.
That was on a good day.
Yeah.
So he's obviously very fit, hard-working guy. And
broad shoulders, I would imagine.
He represented Cambridge 3 times at the boat race.
Did he win?
He went to the Olympics.
Did he
He's
win?
an Olympian.
Did he win the boat race?
No, they lost every time.
He lost 3 times in a row.
You can't blame
in
that
a row,
entirely
if
on
you
him.
pardon the pun.
Because there's about 8 people in a boat, isn't it? How many is it?
Well, it's not about. There's an exact number. They count them as they get in. There are 8. It's the 8.
I always thought I'd been quite good at being the cox. Because that wasn't very big or athletic, and all you need to do is sit in the end and shout at the rowers.
I think you're too big to be the cox.
I'm not sure it was in those days.
The cox was little
very, very dinky
perfectly
people,
formed,
like jockeys,
and they got kind of pipey voices.
Yes, they need to be quite bossy. Anyway, look, we're being a bit frivolous about Matt Brittin. He then went to Google, where he's had a highly distinguished career, and then he's been enjoying what he describes.
He's been a corporate beast, hasn't he?
He's been a corporate beast. He's then enjoying what he describes as a mini gap year since the end of 2024.
What did he do in his gap year?
That is another way of saying I've been unemployed since the end of 2020.
What did he do in his gap year?
He grew a beard.
Went
single sculling. He bought a single sculling boat. The boating is a theme here.
Yeah.
And he plans to learn scuba diving. Well, he's had plenty of time to learn that by now.
Well, you'll have to put that on hold now.
So he's essentially had the whole of 2025 and quite a bit of 26 off. Ooh, that's going to be a shock. When you turn up on day one as the Director General of the BBC, your in tray is sort of brimming with difficult
Well, it'll take him a while to get into the
issues.
building, because you have to go through the process of being vetted and show your driving license and all that stuff.
But look, I think we should come back to
when
this.
will he start, do you think?
Well, I believe very soon, because obviously he's been on his gap year, so he isn't going to leave a job, as people often have to. But I kind of feel we should come back to this when we do know that he's actually going to be the Director General of the BBC. And I suppose the debate about Matt Brittin, and I mean, come on, everybody's going to wish him well. We all want the BBC
he
to
sounds
be
like
well
a nice.
run.
Apparently, the people who work with him at
fun.
Google said you've got one of the best CEOs about to arrive.
He's overcome the disadvantage of going to Robinson College and done very well in life.
He has, and I think. What's interesting is they've gone outside of the usual suspects.
Yeah.
and they've appointed somebody from a different world. I mean,
and that's the big gamble. That's the big gamble, because Google is many things, but it certainly isn't a public service organisation. And the BBC is a public service organisation, sort of to the tips of its fingertips. Can you, and I know this from when I joined the BBC in 2005, I think it was. I was controlling BBC One. I'd never worked in a place like the BBC.
Well, you never worked.
I never worked, really. I'd been in the independent sector.
Exactly.
No, but the culture shock is a big one.
Yeah.
Because suddenly, you know, most organisations, at one level or other, are defined by commercial imperative, by the need to make a profit in order to invest, in order to grow, in order to keep going. You get to the BBC, and that simply isn't the case. You spend money to make programmes as a service to the audience, but even though there's a commercial arm of the BBC Studios, most of the time, if you're in the main part of the BBC, you're not looking at a proposal for a programme or a service sort of thing and thinking, will we make a return on this? Because that's not what you're doing.
The other thing psychologically is he's been very senior. I mean, running Google across the UK and Europe. A global giant. He's kind of he's been managing Man City. And now, as Amal Rajan said, on the podcast last week, the BBC is still huge. It's still, very important to the British creative economy, and it is the biggest public service broadcaster in the world. But comparatively now, it's a smaller beast in the jungle. But what I'm saying is that Matt Brittin is now going to be managing a smaller club in the BBC.
Yeah, but he's the boss of the whole thing. He wasn't the boss of the whole of Google. He was the president of Google in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa.
That's pretty big.
No, that's a big footprint. That's a lot. Absolutely. Yeah, but ultimately, I'm not in any way kind of underestimating the importance of that role. But the action in Google terms is going on in America. Yeah. Of course it is. That's where the strategy is set. That's where the company is based. It's an American company. So he's gone from having a huge swathe of the world under him to basically being, yes, you're right. The Director General of the BBC is a fundamentally British organisation, but he's sure as hell the boss. In other words, the buck stops with him in a way that it may not have done quite the same. It may not have done.
Well, as you say, he's not been appointed yet, but Tim David I thought it was a really good speech at the RTS last week when you said you were going to come.
I know.
And then you didn't put it in your diary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
You're going to need someone to help you with the diary.
But I knew you were going and that you could report back on it. So tell us about Tim's speech at the RTS.
Well, it was a very good valedictory speech. He was very self-deprecating. He made jokes about himself. It's how people leave is often how we judge them. And I think he's left really well. I think he's left really well, Tim. And, he had a lot of warmth in the room. People were there. They asked very good questions. And he basically said, I wish my successor well. And what I wish him is luck. You need a little bit of luck in this job. He said it can get you in 10 days or it can leave you alone for 10 years. It's when things go wrong, like with George Entwistle. Now, I don't know whether people recall George Entwistle, who was a very senior guy, head of what's called Knowledge at the BBC. Then he was promoted to being the Director General. Very nice guy. And he lasted about as long as Liz Truss did as Prime Minister because the Jimmy Savile thing kicked off on his watch. He was unprepared. He went on to the Today programme, I think, and was skewered by John Humphreys because he hadn't been briefed. And he was left twisting in the wind and it was all over. And that happened within
But he said,
5 weeks.
I do remember this. But he
acquired
the nickname rather unfairly Incurious George. And the reason he acquired this nickname was that he explained, I think, on the Today programme that because he was on the knowledge side of the BBC and go back
clearly
to the,
not.
Well, no, bear with me. Go back to the whole kind of educate, inform and entertain.
Yeah.
He's on that side.
Yes.
When at Christmas, the BBC put out a couple of programmes as great tributes to Jimmy Savile.
Yes.
That's the entertainment side.
Yes.
He said, I made a point of not asking anything about them.
Yes.
Which got him this nickname Incurious George.
Yes.
Now, so to circle back to Matt Brittin, within the BBC, there is a logic to that. You keep a Chinese wall between the news people and the entertainment people.
Can you still say that? Can you still say wall?
You keep some sort of barrier between the entertainment people and the news people, and BBC people would sort of say, yes, we understand that. Yes. That's very... To the outside world, seems completely balmy. So when I say Matt Brittin, he's going to have to immerse himself quickly in a culture that will be quite different to Google, that's the sort of thing I mean. And I remember it myself when I joined the BBC, and you find over, decades, the BBC has built up ways of doing things that if you come from the commercial world, they seem a bit weird, if I'm honest. And you could come unstuck doing that. And I obviously agree with what Tim Davies said. If it is Matt Brittin, we wish him well. He needs luck.
Yeah.
George Entwistle was a good man and nice man. He hit a bit of really bad luck very early on.
And he was a BBC insider.
So that's the problem. Because he saw things through a BBC lens. He hadn't worked out how it looked from the outside world looking back in. So Matt Brittin should have that advantage. He's only ever looked at the BBC from the outside in, but he's now got to learn to look at it from the inside out, which is quite a different thing.
It was interesting that he was given
a big challenge.
He was given the Fellowship of the Royal Television Society a little while ago. Before he was.
He's never worked in television. I got a fellowship for the RTS.
Well, we've all got one of those,
for 30 or 40 years.
Well, yes, but I mean, we've just lived a long time in television. In the end, they give it to you out of sympathy.
So you're right. He said he loved TV and said the industry was one I've been trying to get into for a very long time.
But you don't get a fellowship for the Royal Television Society applying to get into TV.
Most people who've been trying to get into television for a long time don't start with Director General of the BBC.
And they don't
start with the job of a runner at Hat-Trick.
Yeah, and they don't start with a fellowship in the Royal Television Society. What the fuck is going on with? So, then he got a CBE, which is fair enough. I mean,
don't know much about his viewing taste, but he listed Morecambe and Wise, Not the 9 o'clock News, Thunderbirds, and Doctor Who as shows that shaped him. He's bang up to date.
Thunderbirds is a good show for him to like, though, because his job is about international rescue. Anyway, Matt, we wish you well, my friend.
We do.
It was very exciting over the weekend.
Yes.
Because a new sketch show was launched. And we've been banging on about this for a long time, saying that sketch shows are due for a bit of a revival, that they're perfect because you can put them out on linear TV. Then you can actually just dismantle them and put them out on social media and get lots and lots of attention that way too, that you get bang for your buck if you're a broadcaster. And there's Sky. They've jumped in. Well, Sky are obviously owned by Comcast. Comcast own NBC. NBC do Saturday Night Live and have been doing so for 50 years under Lorne Michaels. And now they've launched it on the UK. We all held our breath. And what happened?
Well, it was good.
It was good.
It was a lot better than...
It was really good.
I thought it was... funny, we haven't discussed this, have we? I mean...
And we're not a review show, but...
No, I know. All sketch shows are a little bit patchy. But I thought, considering everything and the risk of trying to redo SNL, which is an American institution, I thought it was a very, very strong start with some very funny sketches. But then we talk about luck, and we hope Matt Brittin has luck. How delighted must the people behind SNL and Sky have been when the following day Donald Trump posts a clip from it?
Well, explain that. So
the very first sketch is Keir Starmer, played by George Fouracres.
Very funny.
It's very funny, very funny. He's agonising about what to say to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And he's being indecisive and says, all I want is him to like me. And, and David Lammy's standing beside him, egging him on. It's a very simple but very funny sketch. Donald Trump posted it.
Yeah.
Now, that is publicity that SNL couldn't dream of. That's the sort of feather in their cap.
It's fantastic. And there was some. The most downloaded was the Tina Fey opening. They got Tina Fey, who was she's an SNL alumna, and she was great. And in the audience, they had popping up Nicola Coughlan for ex-Derry Girls Bridgerton,
Graham Norton,
and Michael Cera.
Yes.
And they all chipped in with their little couple of minutes. So it felt very star-studded.
You know what I found myself thinking?
What?
I wonder how much they paid Graham Norton to be there.
Well, the budget for each episode is £2 million.
Well, there you go.
£2 million is a lot for a sketch show. But you know what? I was so pleased because I think it exceeded people's expectations, and it will get better because that was the first run out. There was a very funny sketch where they had David Attenborough,
played by George Foraker.
George Foraker, who said, who began to, he said, "Hello, David Attenborough here. It's any minute now."
And then it was his last supper.
And then he said, "I'm going to invite you to my last supper where I've cloned using my brother's Jurassic Park cloning techniques. I brought my favourite people back from history." And it was... he wanted to have scintillating conversation. All they wanted to talk about was what was on the menu. What was on the menu. It was a really funny sketch. And Jack Shepp played Princess Diana and he upstaged everybody because every time the camera, he just kept blinking and looking very kind of coy at the camera. Yeah. It was really good, actually. I thought, I'm glad. And by the way, it got 226,000 viewers, which in that slot on Sky One is a very, very. Except that's not the significant number. I know. The significant number is, yeah, but it's an indication. No, it's not a TV hit, right? It's a global social media hit. 1.9 billion what they call impressions. So it's across social media platforms, 1.9 billion. It also got relatively well reviewed. I mean, The Guardian's Lucy Mangan said it could have been a lot worse. Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Lucy. you could put that on my tombstone. That's what if you had a play on in the West End, you might put up not as bad as we thought it was going to be. As bad as we thought it was going to be. But actually, just to pick up one thing you said, it'll get better. Well, I hope it'll get better. Watching it took me back to making the 11 o'clock show for Channel 4 in the 1990s, which was a big thing when I was running Talkback and a big opportunity. And yet it was also a bit of a nightmare because the relentless need to come up with topical comedy. We were doing it 3 nights a week. Even with a big, well-funded team. I mean, not 2 million an episode by a very long way, but we had a perfectly good budget. And we found it, a lot of the time we were thinking, oh, we wish it could be funnier. Within the 11 o'clock show, if people remember it, we found, as it were, discovered some fantastic talent, in particular Sacha Baron Cohen and Ricky Gervais. Both came through the 11 o'clock show. And Daisy Donovan had a moment. Daisy Donovan, and Ian Lee, who co-presented it. Other people as well. Lee Mack, I think, was involved. Funny bunch. Funny people. Yeah. But boy, the pressure. We were doing 3 nights a week. It was only half an hour, I think. So they're doing an hour once a week. The pressure is enormous. And it's not like making a panel show like you make with Have I Got News For You, where you obviously need a script and you need gags, but then the rest of it's improvised. SNL is sketches, and it's quite long sketches, which is their tradition. And I think it's good that they run long, but it's a hell of a thing to keep it up week in, week out. And they've got a big writing team, though, and they've got some very good writers. And also, they've committed very strongly to new people. A lot of those writing team, I was told, are people who are almost, if you like, straight out of the Edinburgh Fringe. They are not kind of wizened old kind of gagsmiths who've been doing it for years. We're working with 1 or 2 of them on TV projects, and they're really funny. And I love that idea. This is why I think that in a way, this generation, the access they have to just getting things onto YouTube themselves, not having to wait for permission from a broadcaster like we used to have to do to get onto a screen. They can get onto a screen from their bedroom and they can show us that they're funny, and that's how they get attention. I think that's a really good thing. And I think that, someone wrote that SNL it's not a TV hit. It's a social media hit, and that these days for that generation is much more important. American SNL, much more important, plays on Sky, I think, gets an unbelievably small audience. It gets about 6,000. And the reason why it stayed on the air is because of its social media presence. And similarly with Have I Got News For You on CNN, is it does very well on a Saturday night. In fact, last week's show got the highest rating ever in its run. But more importantly for CNN, it does really well on its YouTube channel and on social media platforms. That's where we're heading. There was another review in the Daily Telegraph by a guy called Ed Power,
who gave it, to be fair, he gave it a 4-star review. He said it was shockingly competent.
Yeah.
Odd phrase. But he said, even though the Sakir Starmer sketch had a whiff of hastily written student sketch about it. But to me, that's not a criticism. That's exactly the point.
That's good.
That's exactly the point. If you go all the way back to Beyond the Fringe and the beginning of television satire, that was the week that was. That had a whiff of hastily written student sketches about it because these guys were about 2 years out of university.
Yeah.
You know, Peter Cook. And so, so they'd been pushed forward very young before the rough edges had been sort of polished off them. And that was all part of the charm of it. And how nice, and we've talked about it before with the Mitchell and Webb sketch show on Channel 4, essentially because that's like a sort of oasis in the desert of sketch shows. But Mitchell and Webb are very, very established talent. How nice and very much to Sky's credit that they've taken the risk of people saying, oh, this isn't as good as the American one. No, we're not as good as the Americans at this. They've ignored that risk and said, go with it and go with overwhelmingly new talent. I mean, Tina Fey's obviously a kind of one-off for obvious reasons. People like Graham Norton aren't going to be there every week. The talent who made us laugh are very, very, new to television. And
But
they look to me like the stars of the future.
But the SNL, template works because you have a big star hosting it.
Yeah.
So that gets your publicity, and then, as you say, I think a few of these people will become major comedy stars as they head off into the future. A bit like when our friend and colleague Jeffrey Perkins did Friday Night Live, they discovered Harry Enfield.
Yeah, and Fry and Laurie and people. That was effectively an SNL style show.
It was exactly SNL. I'm glad because I now think that it will reduce the level of fear in the commissioning editors' lives of whether we should do sketch shows or not. I'm looking forward to some more sketch shows.
Next week's show is going to be hosted by actor Jamie Dornan, very good-looking man.
There's a very funny trailer.
I haven't seen the trailer, but can I say I've played football with Jamie Dornan?
Have you?
Yeah, and he's a very competitive footballer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he plays a rough kickabout.
Are we going to have a game of top trumps Jamie Dornan? Because I once had a Zoom call with Jamie Dornan during COVID.
Yeah, but I've tackled him.
All right. Okay. You got physical with him.
Actually, to be fair, I think he possibly tackled me.
Yeah. And
effortlessly.
He was on Zoom with his business partner, and we were talking about a project, and because he's got his own company in Northern Ireland. He's a really bright guy, and we're having a very nice conversation. And I was excited because I just discovered on Zoom, because we were all on Zoom in those days, all the time because of COVID, that there's a little thing in the window. If you click on your face, it comes up and it gives you the option to hide self-view.
Yeah.
And I said to Jamie Dornan, oh, it's so exciting. I can click hide self-view and I don't have to look at myself when I'm talking.
I can look at a better looking man.
And he said, why would I do that? I said, well, if I look like you, I wouldn't do it. But I don't look like you. Anyway, that's
he's very good looking. If you've only Zoomed him, Jim, you won't know then. He's a bit shorter than you think.
All very handsome actors in my experience, which I always tell my wife. When she's going on about how gorgeous an actor is, I said, well, he's only 3'4".
It's the Tom Cruise syndrome.
Yeah. Oh, it was Cillian Murphy.
Cillian Murphy,
she was banging on about Cillian Murphy once, about Peaky Blinders, how gorgeous he was. I said, listen, he basically, when he gets off a chair, he's shorter than when he's sitting on it.
His legs dangle off the stool.
And she said, that's pathetic. That's just your insecurity, which she's not wrong. It's a sigh of relief and a big hooray for SNL
Anyway, we got
UK.
something else to talk about, which is also about comedy and jokes.
This is the most serious item we're talking about this week, I think.
This is the most consequential story. Yes. And I'm sure, our listeners will have read it because actually one aspect of this story, which is about Bob Monkhouse, by the way, in the repair shop, is why is it out there? How has that story got out there?
Well, let's tell the story first.
Let's tell the story. So the story is that the repair shop, wonderful program,
good show,
really charming, quintessentially BBC show. They restore all sorts of things. And somebody
in a world
came
of throwing things away,
would they like to restore the late comedian's Bob Monkhouse's joke book?
There were two of them.
And he's famous for having kept joke books. Some people say he noted down other people's jokes and then used them, but that's not the point of this story at all. He was Bob Monkhouse was a television giant and a brilliant comedian.
Although, just to stop you there for a minute, because in fact he was renowned, and Barry Cryer once told me that he'd walk around with envelopes with 60 quid in them. And if he saw you, and he'd say to Barry, I'm using that line of yours, here, get a drink on me. And he'd give him an envelope with 60 quid in it. And he was notorious for it. He was called the thief of
hang on. If he paid 60 quid, he's sort of not a thief.
No, but
it's a commercial transaction.
He was called the thief of bad gags.
Okay.
And when his joke books were stolen from the BBC in 1995, they went missing for 2 years.
Yes, and that was a big story.
And he offered a reward. And David Renwick, the brilliant writer who wrote One Foot in the Grave and wrote Jonathan Creek, was also a writer on The Two Ronnies. And the joke was Bob Monkhouse's joke books have been stolen. The police are treating it as a case of receiving stolen goods. So
that's a good joke.
So it was out there, Peter. But who cares? Yeah. Comedians do it all the time.
Yeah, but leave aside. I mean, and let's not forget as well that Bob Monkhouse was a kind of. There was a time when the BBC schedule was full of programs with Bob's name in them. Bob's Full House. Bob's this. Bob that. He was like the Claudia Winkleman of his day. He was so dominant as a presenter and a very funny man. I once saw him, by the way, doing a charity auction.
Yeah.
He was fantastic.
Well, there were two Bob Monkhouses.
Getting money out of people.
Yeah. But there were two Bob Monkhouses. I had a meeting with him once towards the end of his career where I wanted to do a late night show. It was a kind of game show, but with that twist. And I'd seen him do his club act, and his club act and his TV persona were completely different. Yeah. The club act was ruder, and it was darker and blue and funny, but very, very funny. And which we'll get onto, actually, because I think this is probably what is germane to our story. And I said to him, I'd quite like to do the late night show with your club persona, not your TV persona. He said, absolutely not. He said, I'm afraid on television, I'm, friendly Bob Monkhouse with a cheesy grin. And in the nightclubs, I'm much more of a loose lounge comedian. So he knew who he was, Bob.
Okay, absolutely.
So the story
let's complete the story. So the story is that they were going to restore his joke books.
Yes.
And then
because they were falling into disrepair.
Yeah, and people looked at the jokes.
Great item.
And they were worried about it. So the managing director of Ricochet, who make the show, Joanna Ball, she said, we planned to fix the joke book, but when we got it to the barn and saw it in its entirety, we realised it contains many jokes that were not appropriate for a programme. We explained this to the family and returned the book to them. We didn't complete filming of the item, so it was never included in the programme. So I guess the question here is that a reasonably example of bringing a modern sensibility to bear on what were undoubtedly rather outdated jokes?
Yeah.
Or is that, frankly, political correctness gone mad? Because you didn't need to feature any of these jokes in the programme. There are plenty of Bob Monkhouse jokes that are, by the way, are brilliant and stand up today. So why, you might ask, are you bringing this sort of retrospective kind of censorship to Bob Monkhouse's comedy because some of these jokes are written down in his joke shop?
Well, it's a good point, isn't it? First of all, yes, you don't read out those jokes which are dated, and that's the point, isn't it?
It's easy to cut round them. Absolutely no problem.
But if you look at history in that way, he was working in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and in the 90s a bit. He died, I don't know, must be nearly 20 years ago. And they were of a type. These were comedians who were of their generation. When we judge history from our own perspective, it's such a stupid, uninformed way of looking at a period. Instead of being judgmental, be curious, saying, I wonder why they talked about those things, because it was accepted. Because in those days, we didn't have the consciousness that we have about minorities and people who, because of their sex or because of their race or because of their gender, are in some way disadvantaged. Fine. But this strikes me as being, it's pathetic. It's stupid. Look at some of the jokes that they could have, if they wanted to read out jokes.
Probably his most famous joke. When I first said I wanted to be a comedian, everybody laughed. They're not laughing now. Yeah. It's the way you tell them, by the way. I'm not claiming I'm telling them very well. That there's nothing offensive about that joke. It's just a very clever joke.
And things like, you know, where do the homeless have 90% of their accidents?
Another clever joke. I still enjoy sex at 74. I live at 76, so it's no distance. Now, oh God, that's mildly blue, but that's a good joke.
No, it's a good joke.
We could go on.
But these are the kind of, I think this is the kind of, you know, pusillanimous attitude that some people have to this, is that it makes me sick, actually. I think that the fact is that now we're worried about offence. And if you're offended, so what? You're offended. It's obviously it's not a BBC story, it's a Ricochet story, because they made the decision. Somebody on their team felt uncomfortable by the remarks in the book. Some person said, I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. I've just read a joke about a mother-in-law. Oh, for fuck's sake.
When the inventor of the drawing board messed things up, what did he go back to?
Exactly.
It's like a joke. I think we need to be careful here, Jim. We could disappear into an abyss of Bob Monkhouse jokes.
I think let's bring back Bob Monkhouse jokes. Well, actually, Jimmy Carr, I think, is the Bob Monkhouse.
I couldn't agree more.
De nos jours.
Yeah.
Is that he says some jokes which are completely out there and they're really funny. And, you know, he's a very smart guy. But, you know, it's... I don't know. It leaves me a little bit speechless, this kind of thing. It's such a ridiculous... And also, it's who leaked it.
That's what. That's why.
Who leaked this story?
There's a link between this and Matt Brittin, to go right back to this conversation.
Right.
Which is, these things are partly about the story, and they're partly about how and why are they appearing in this way in the public domain. I'm guessing it's the people who supplied the joke book who were really upset. They also rightly realised that the newspapers have got...
But we don't know it was them that leaked it.
No. We don't know that. But whoever did must have rightly realised that the newspapers have got an endless appetite for stories that appear to embarrass the BBC. So you know, to go back to our friend Matt Brittin, this is the sort of thing that will happen almost every week. This is a minor BBC story. I read somebody comment saying this is one of the most shocking BBC scandals of recent years. No, it isn't. It's a tiny story, and it's a Ricochet story anyway.
Yes.
But the papers will dress it up as BBC... you know, political correctness gone mad, as it were.
Well,
as a matter of fact, I've got some sympathy with this.
I do think, because
of course they could have restored these books without revealing sexist and racist
But they restore
jokes.
things. They restore objects. I remember that I did a little bit of research about this. They've restored objects, a sea chest that was brought back from somebody who was in the East India Company. Well, the East India Company is quite rightly accused of doing all kinds of colonial abuses in India, causing famines, etc., etc. Objects brought back from Africa, an African drum brought back from somebody who worked in Africa during the days of empire. Well, are we now endorsing people who made money from slavery on the repair shop? I mean, surely, you know, this hypocrisy for me is just... Like I said, Peter, I'm very rarely speechless, but I think this is ridiculous. Is that the repair shop need to... I mean, Ricochet needs to have a word with themselves.
Thanks for explaining your speechlessness at length there. Yeah.
Yes.
You did seem to find something to say.
I'm very articulate about my speechlessness.
Look, I think we agree. Return of SNL, good thing.
Yeah.
Silly fuss about the repair shop and Bob Monkhouse's joke, bad thing.
Well, maybe SNL will do a sketch about it next week.
This is how our format should evolve. We're just saying good thing, bad thing.
Yeah.
Matt Brittin, we hope, good thing. Sounds like a good, solid bloke.
Yeah.
Good at rowing. Wasn't in the footlights like us. But he doesn't need to have been. So there you have it. Good thing, bad thing, could be one or the other. Does that sum up this podcast?
I think I'm going to
You're looking at me
ask
as if
for
I'm
the
mad.
nurse to come in now and give you your medication, because clearly you're just rambling. I think we should end the podcast at this point, Peter, and you need to get some sugar.
Well, that's all for this week. Thanks very much for listening. Are there any questions about the world of television you've always wanted to ask? Don't expect to get answers from us, but do send them our way. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, you can contact us in the usual way. Our emails, or on our socials.
Carrier pigeons.
Pigeon post, telepathy, whatever you choose.
Even better yet, why not subscribe to our YouTube channel?
Oh, you have to look at us then.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, please do follow Insiders, the TV podcast, wherever you get your podcasts.
Tell your friends.